Well, welcome back to our study of Revelation. Took a week off last week, 4th of July here in the U.S. Observance of that holiday. And then I live in Estes Park, Colorado, and it's visitor season right now. This is a tourist destination. We're right outside Rocky Mountain National Park. So I've got guests coming in and out, and that's why I'm a little bit delayed in getting today's chapter of Revelation completed. So forgive me as I try to stay on track here. But this is just the time of year. I have family here and grandchildren and lots of people in and out of the house. So I'm just taking an hour right now to record this. So I pray that this is useful for you. Thanks so much for all of you who are sticking with it and going through it. Hope you find it not only educational, but edifying and encouraging as well. God's word is to be not just examined, but to live and to change us, really. So I pray that this would be life-changing for you, just a little bit more in becoming like Christ. So today we are in Revelation. We're going to be in chapter 6. Our theme as we go through Revelation is live like you're leaving. Live in anticipation of what's going to be happening. And what we find today is we are in this section of things to come. Remember, we have a outline that's provided for us in Revelation 1:19, the things which you have seen, which were in chapter 1. The things which are, that's the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3. And now the things which are to come. This is the section that I guess the book of Revelation is famous for us, chapters 6 to 18. And this is the good stuff. Sometimes people when they think of the book of Revelation, they think exclusively of this description of that 7-year tribulation period. So this is how it lays out kind of graphically. Told you before, the line in the middle, 1 through 22, those are each of the chapters of the book. So I'm trying to orient you to the book and to the chapters. And again, the things which you have seen, that is, the things which John has seen has been revealed to him, are in chapter 1 primarily, chapters 2 and 3, discussion of the churches, the things which are, and then the things will take place after these things. That's the tribulation period from chapter 6 through 18 or 19, really. So that's what we see as we look closely in the layout at the book. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the forest for all the trees, and I want to make sure that we step back once in a while and orient ourselves to the overall book. An interesting thing about the book of Revelation is it's not the only time that this period of tribulation is discussed in the Bible. So it's part of God's progressive revelation of not just this time of tribulation, but the progressive revelation of the coming of the kingdom. So it's first introduced in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. And then it's expanded upon in what's called the Olivet Discourse in Matthew. And it also appears in abbreviated form in Mark and Luke. And then the fullest revelation we have is Revelation 6 to 19. And as I said, the revelation that we get here is more detailed, and it draws extensively on the Old Testament revelation and pulls it together. So it's not as if this has just been introduced at the end of the Bible. This has been a topic of conversation throughout the Bible and really shaped Israel's what I'd call apocalyptic or end times worldview of things. Here's another picture of that same sort of progressive revelation. up in the upper left-hand corner, what we see in Daniel is a revelation of the time frame that surrounds the last years of Israel. So he's got this period of 69 weeks that is the history of Israel, and then a interlude, which is the church, and then one final week, that final 7 years is what Jesus is talking about in the Olivet Discourse, and what we find revealed in even more detail during the tribulation period there. Down on the bottom is kind of a graphic that is depicting, again, Jesus's additional revelation, more detailed revelation of the king's return, of Jesus's return, how he's bringing the kingdom to the earth. We find that 7-year period divided into, again, 3.5 years, as Daniel does. And what Jesus does is he's telling Israel, not the church. The church is not on the earth at that point, but he's telling Israel and warning Israel what's going to be happening in some additional amount of detail. And then that detail is expanded upon greatly by Jesus in these chapters of Revelation that we're entering in. What we see in this is, and sometimes it gets confusing, that's why I'm kind of laying this out ahead of time, and we'll come back to this as we go through it, is that there's kind of a framing or a change of scenes as we go through these chapters in Revelation about the tribulation. There's first a picture on earth. Chapter 6 is the events are unfolding on earth. And then in chapter 7, we have this interlude. And in the interlude, we get a picture of what's happening in heaven. And then we go back to another series of judgments, the trumpet judgments, and in chapters 8 and 9. And then we go back to a longer interlude in heaven from chapters 10 to 15, and then the final cycle of judgment in chapter 16. So we go back and forth. If this was a movie, we'd be changing scenes and looking from earth to heaven, then back to earth, then to heaven, and then back to earth again. So we'll bring this up as we go. I just want to orient you to the book now so it doesn't surprise you or confuse you later. Coming back to this now, there's a couple different views that you should be aware of. I want to make you aware of how this unfolds, these seals, these trumpets, and these bowls. On the left there, we see this summary of what's called a recapitulation theory or parallel. We can think of these things as parallel. The idea is that these seal, trumpet, and bowl judgments are pictures of the same series of judgments from different angles. So the 6 seals, they cover the whole tribulation period, and then the trumpets and bowls repeat those judgments that are going on. So it's just recapitulating, repeating them. Some of the evidence is the 6th seal and the 7th trumpet seem to be events immediately preceding Jesus's return. But I think a better view of this, for a number of reasons, is it's chronological. That is, the 6 seals, then the 7 seals, then the 7 trumpets, then the 7 bowls, one after another, 3 cycles of judgment that come chronologically. For a number of reasons. First is the 6 seals clearly, as you'll see today, begin this period of tribulation. So everybody would agree that the 7 seals introduce this beginning of the tribulation. And then just the way the book's laid out, the trumpets and bowls come later. They follow after the seals. I think as we go through this, I'll point out that the contents of the judgments during the seals, trumpets, and bowls, they're similar, but they're not the same, right? They're not exactly the same. They're just similar. So we don't want to be, because something's similar doesn't mean that they're identical. And the way this is laid out might be a little confusing, but stick with me. The seventh seal and the seventh trumpet contain the next set of judgments. So the seventh seal opens and introduces the seven trumpets. Then the seventh trumpet is sounded, and that introduces or alerts people to the bowl judgments that are coming. So there seems to be this built-in progression that we see in the book. The content of that interlude, remember I said between the sixth and eighth chapters is a chapter of interlude, and then between the trumpets and the bowls are several chapters of a heavenly interlude. They're not the same. There's different things going on, and when we come to the end, the bowl judgments in chapter 16, they're called the last plague. So again, seems to be evidence of this sequence that's going on when it says it's the last plagues. And when the last bowl is poured out, the last of the last, in Revelation 16:17, a voice from heaven, from the throne, God, announces it is done. So it seems to be an introduction with the seals and a conclusion with the bowls. So again, for these reasons, I think it's better to understand this chronologically. There's also in the text, and I pointed this out before, this recurring phrase metatautou in Greek, which and then, which is clearly a marker of chronological progression is what's going on there. So this is another way to look at it. I'm laboring this point because sometimes it can get confusing and throw people off. And I don't think the book of Revelation is meant to be confusing. I think it's meant to be pretty straightforward and clear. If we just take it in a consistently literal way, as well it will be, we'll see that. So we see the progression here again. We see the seals on the left. There's 6 seals that bring out 6 judgments. And then there's a pause in chapter 7, a heavenly interlude. And then the 7th seal is opened. And that 7th seal opens on the trumpets. And then the 6 trumpets are sounded, and more judgment is poured out on the earth. This is Jesus bringing his kingdom to the earth. Then there's a pause in chapters 10 to 15. And then the 7th trumpet is sounded finally. And the 7th trumpet introduces the 7 bowl judgments. And then the 7 bowl judgments are completed to the end, right? The last bowl judgment is said to be the last. They're introduced as the last. At the end of chapter 16, it's pronounced that it's done. So again, we see this progression. And the 7 last plagues, they're called in Revelation 21 later in the book. So again, we see, I think, evidence for a chronological unfolding, not a repetition of the same judgments going on and on. Hope that's clear for you. I'll be reinforcing this as we go through this and considering these things to keep us on track and to keep it clear for us. A question comes up sometimes: why use this imagery of a seal, a trumpet, and bowl? And lots of theories around that. This is Mark Hitchcock when he teaches Revelation. This is his view. I think it's a good explanation. Number one, it's memorable, right? It gets into your mind. Seals and trumpets and bowls. We can picture these things, and they kind of good picture in our mind helps us to remember it. there's this emotional aspect to it, the unsealing, the sounding of the trumpets, the bowls pouring out. There's a drama associated with them as each one is revealed. These images work across cultures. So again, these are things that are to come. They were being shown to John at the end of the first century, and they still resonate with us today. Here we are in the 21st century. So they're transcultural and timeless. So I think those are good reasons why we use these imagery, and I think it's kind of satisfying explanation. It's an overview. Notice I like to give you overviews before we get into the details, because sometimes when we get into the details, we can get lost. We lose sight of what we're doing or lose sight of the big picture. So here's a overview. We see these four horsemen of the apocalypse, often called in the first four bowls that are poured out. The white horse. Lots of different explanations of what this means, but it seems, I think, the best explanation, and we'll talk about it as we get into the details, is this is a warning against false Christs. Jesus warned about this in the Olivet Discourse, and this is deception, people being led astray, people being deceived by people who claim to be the Messiah but really are not. The red horse depicts war, the end of peace. So the prince, the Daniel 9:27 introduces at the beginning of the tribulation, ultimately brings war. That's why verses 1 and 2 about the false Christ and the deception, they promise peace, but it's a empty peace. It's a fragile peace. It's a peace that really doesn't last, or what I would call a pretend peace. Peace without victory is impossible. And that's what we see going on even today, I think, in Israel, pressuring to get a negotiated peace, a two-state solution. None of these are going to work. It's going to result in war. The black horse is famine, and you can see the follow-on. Famine often results from war that devastates not only farmland, but even the surviving farmland. If you can't transport the food to where people need it, you have famine. So you can have a lot of food, but a famine. And that's, again, what happens in war is the supply chain is disrupted, devoted to war material, or just destroyed. Roads and bridges and trains and ports and airports and everything else just destroyed. The ashen horse, which we'll see, is death. And a third of the population of the earth is destroyed. And by today's count, be almost 2 billion people, which is more than the population of mainland China. Following on is martyrdom, killed because of their testimony. And again, you can see the kind of the progression here, that there'll be witnessing, there'll be proclamation, there'll be warning of what's happening. There'll be people coming to faith during the tribulation, and those people, because of their witness, will be killed because of their testimony. And then finally, these disasters will fall from heaven, cosmic, galactic, physical disturbances on the earth and in the heavens, showing God's involvement in all this. And people will recognize that God is orchestrating this. So let's get into it. Grab your Bible. This would be a good place to rest in the video, to stop it here, and to open up your Bible. Revelation 6, I got mine in front of me, and I've got it on the slides here as well. So just 17 verses, relatively a short chapter. It says, "Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying, as with a voice of thunder, "Come." Well, of course, the Lamb is Jesus himself. Jesus is the one who broke the seal and is unleashing the judgment that comes with it. As you'll see, Jesus is with the Spirit, and he's those living creatures are acting as the agent of the Father. They're before the throne. So these living creatures are acting as Jesus's agents. They are instruments bringing judgment to the earth, and they command that the coming of the kingdom begin. That's what they're saying. They thunder out, "Come." Notice here that also it's Jesus that's introducing these things. So these are not um, the wrath of Satan that's being unleashed, as some would say, but really the wrath of the Lamb is beginning here. Even though wrath isn't mentioned till later in the chapter, we see that these first judgments, this introduction of the first seal and the sealed judgments, is being unleashed by Jesus. Verse 2 says, "I looked and behold." Now this is John. He's in heaven. The loud voice gets his attention. "Come." A white horse, that's what he sees. And he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him. And he went out and conquering and to conquer. So some would say, well, later on in chapter 20, we see a white horse and Jesus is on it. So two white horses seems to be Jesus that's depicted here. Others look at this as just a spirit of conquest. Those who would look at this as a kind of a historicist view would say, well, this is just introducing this spirit of conquest that seems to be in the world. But what we see here, I think, is in light of what Daniel has taught and what Jesus has said, is a prince that's coming, a prince that's going to offer peace to the world, a prince that is going to be honored. That's Stephanos' crown. It's not a diadem as Jesus wears in Revelation 19, not a kingly crown, but a victor's crown. So this figure on the white horse is pronouncing themselves to be victor, to be in charge. And notice they have a bow with no arrows. So it's just a bow. What's the significance of that? I'd say that this is suggesting that their only weapon is not military, but one of persuasion. They're going to tell a very good story. They're going to make the deal of the century, I think, to bring peace to the Middle East. That's their weapon. Their weapon is the ability to persuade, the ability to make a deal. I remember that back in the first Trump administration, he would brag about the Abraham Accords as the deal of the century. Not saying that President Trump, former President Trump, is the Antichrist or this figure that Daniel predicted. I'm just saying that it's an example of what's going to happen when this figure is introduced. I think this is going to happen after the tribulation or after the rapture of the church. We see this parallel as well. Jesus had warned of false Christs. Jesus had warned that false Christs would come and deceive many. So I think both Daniel 9:26 and Matthew 24:4 and 5, both Daniel and Jesus are predicting this coming person that's going to command respect. It's going to command obedience. It's going to be able to make a deal, persuade people, and bring peace for a time, for 3.5 years, to the Middle East. So, to go on then, verses 3 and 4. The second seal is open now. When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." So these are those living creatures that were before the throne in chapter 4. And he again says, come. So he is bringing forth this tribulation. And a red horse went out. So this is, again, you see the chronology here. First the white horse, now the red horse went out. And to him who sat on that horse, so there's a figure, a person on the horse, and he's given permission. He's granted to take peace from the earth. Now, this is important because you don't want to think that suddenly God is no longer sovereign. God is granting permission to do these things. God is, in his sovereignty, is allowing these things to happen because this is how the kingdom is being brought to the earth. Again, this isn't Satan at work. This isn't Satan granting him power. This is the Lord, and he grants him to take peace from the earth, that men would slay one another with a great sword, and a great sword was given to him. So this is war. This is war. So it's a global event that's happening here. This is not a local war. This is not a war that's just centered on Israel. This is a war that is coming to the earth. He's taking peace from the earth. And again, the idea here is there's some peace to take, right? That this first person that came on the white horse established peace. And now the peace is being taken away. Perhaps the focus of the peace, we'll see in verse 9, those who were recognized and resisted the false Christ. So perhaps this is the beginning of a resistance by those who were not believers at the rapture, but have since in the rapture come to be believers, perhaps from, YouTube videos like this one, they see it, or they have read Daniel and Matthew and realize what's happening, and they resist the false Christ, and reading Jesus's warning. So war comes, and war that is global, war that is worldwide. So some consider this perhaps the invasion that's talked about in Ezekiel 38:39. There's lots of parallels here. There's a physical regathering of the nation in Ezekiel 37, and then this spiritual renewal. So this seems to be happening in between that, and it fits the kind of overall chronology. We have a physical regathering and then a spiritual renewal that's depicted in Ezekiel and also in the book of Revelation. And this would fall in that. The tribulation begins when a peace treaty makes Israel secure. And we see the invasion of 38 and 39 begins in a time of peace. It's emphasized by Ezekiel that this is a time when Israel is dwelling without walls. It's picturing it at peace. There's I think, rapid transition from peace to war that's predicted, anticipated in 1 Thessalonians 5:3. And that kind of is explained by how does that suddenly happen? Well, there's a sudden invasion at the beginning of Ezekiel 38. There's a battle that takes place that Ezekiel says it happens in the latter years or the last days of Israel's history, which is that period of the tribulation. We are bringing the history of Israel to a finish and bringing it to its climax, which is the revelation and the arrival of Jesus's kingdom on earth. So we see that parallel here as well. And Ezekiel 38 says that the attackers will, in a perverse way, the attackers are going to reveal God to the world when they're destroyed. That's going to be the perhaps the reason why there are so many people in heaven in Revelation chapter 7. When we get there and we see that there's a vast multitude in heaven worshiping with 144,000, could be the victims of this war that happens at this point that Ezekiel's talking about. And again, the destruction of this attacking force could explain why the beast has this worldwide power. His opposition has been vanquished, in other words. So a lot of evidence that this war is associated with the war that's in Ezekiel 38 and 39. As we get toward the end of this period, I'm going to nuance that a little bit. I just want to introduce the big picture here. As we get further on, I'm going to make the case that there's actually two wars in Ezekiel 38 and 39. One that happens now, close to the midpoint of the tribulation, and then another that happens later toward the end point of the tribulation. So we'll discuss that when we get there, but I just wanted to introduce this to you. I think it's maybe not overall the Battle of Armageddon. I think there's some differences there, and we'll see those differences when we come to chapters 19 and 20. I'll highlight the differences, and again, it's part of making the case that seems to be actually two wars that are going on here. But let's go on in Revelation 6 before we go on too many bunny trails. Verses 5 and 6, we see the third seal. So again, this progression, they seem to be happening in a particular order: first, second, third. We don't have to be Bible scholars to notice that, do we? There's a progression here. And again, another living creature. So these living creatures are a different class of a supernatural or angelic being, and there seems to be several classes of these angelic beings. And this living creature acting as God's agent says, "Come." Remember, he's in that area before the throne. He says, "Come." John, again, alerted and looks, and behold, a black horse. So John is watching this scene unfold, and this black horse comes galloping out of heaven. And he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hands. So you can imagine the picture with the creature or the horse coming out, a person on his back holding these scales, the kind of scales that in old times were used in stores to measure out so many ounces of this or so many pounds of that. I remember when I was a young boy, my grandparents owned a local neighborhood grocery store on the south side of Chicago, and they had these brass scales in the store. And if somebody wanted to buy, say, a pound of ground beef, they would put the ground beef on one side of the scale and a 1 pound weight on the other side of the scale, and they would take away or add ground beef until the scale was level, till it was even. So they were weighing those things. That's what we see here. Here's something like the voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. And do not damage the oil and the wine." Well, it might make you scratch your head. It should. What the heck is a denarius? And what's he talking about? 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. So wheat and barley, these are kind of staples of a Middle Eastern diet, staples of a diet in Israel and really around the world. Bread and is a staple. And these were, the food of the common people. I guess we could say that. Luxuries were oil and wine. And this seems to be indicating that this wheat and barley, denarius, is a day's wages. A quart of wheat would maybe satisfy a family for a day. So what we see here is just enough food, just enough food and money to keep you alive for one day. And that's what we see. But on the other hand, the oil and wine are surprisingly available. Surprisingly, these are luxury items. What's going on here? Well, it appears that what's being shown here is a picture that the tribulation is at this point impacting the common people more than the wealthy. The wealthy can buy their way out of lots of problems, lots of headaches, and continue in their wealth. We see that even in the world today. As we look around just here in the United States, it seems like the wealthy people are doing well, benefiting a number of different ways, making money from investments, being able to buy luxury goods, where the common people are struggling more and more just to make ends meet. And the middle class, at least in the United States, seems to be squeezed more and more economically and having more and more difficulty just buying the essentials. So I think that's what we see here is a targeting of the most vulnerable at this point in the tribulation. And again, when we make this correlation, Jesus had warned of false Christs. He warned of wars and rumors of wars, and he warned of famine. So this seems to be an expansion, an elaboration, a progressive revelation of what Jesus has told us in Matthew 24 and 25. So we see what's happening here, and not too hard to see foreshadowings of what's coming. Again, we are not in the tribulation right now. The tribulation will be unmistakable. It'll be worldwide. Jesus characterized it as something that's going to be so severe that nothing like it has come onto the earth until that time, and nothing like it afterwards. So this is going to be the pinnacle of suffering in the world, and we're not seeing that yet, but we do see the foreshadowings of those. And again, brothers and sisters, if you're watching this, if you're following along, most likely you won't be here to witness this. You won't be here to see these things. You will have been raptured to heaven. But what we need to be doing is living now in light of what's coming. So the fourth seal is death. And it says, when the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard a voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, an ashen horse. And he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following him. So this is a picture of death coming into the earth, widespread death. Authority was given them over a fourth of the earth. I think I said a third earlier, but a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by the wild beasts of the earth. Look at those tools of destruction that are being unleashed. So the ashen horse, often translated pale, here it's translated ashen. It's a yellowish green or greenish gray color, suggesting someone who's deathly sick or perhaps even a corpse. So that's what that horse looks like. The horse looks like death. It's coming and it looks like death, and death is personified. So it's just a real multi-dimensional, I'd say, picture of death and sickness and disease that's coming on the earth. And again, often these things come in the wake of wars, don't they? Putrid bodies on the battlefield, hard to dispose of so many bodies. And that's what we see here, is just widespread death. It says the fourth of the earth, right now the population of the earth is about almost $8 billion, 8 billion people, 7.7 billion. So almost 2 billion are going to die if we look at a fourth of the earth. Just about 2 billion people. That will be incredible. 2 billion people, as I said at the beginning, roughly the population of mainland China, a significant population of Europe or Africa or the United States. The instrument of this authority or this destruction is the sword. Again, we're looking at a worldwide tribulation. So it's going to be this worldwide war that's going on, perhaps targeting faithful witnesses to what's happening. Famine. We've talked about famine going out and famine being in terms of lack of food or just the inability to get the food to the people who need it. Again, results of war, pestilence, disease, and wild beasts or wild animals. The word translated wild beast is used 39 times in Revelation to refer to this political ruler that's coming. He's characterized as a wild beast, so it could be not wild animals being let loose in metropolitan areas or let loose on people. Could be that, but in the book of Revelation, wild beasts seems to refer to a political leader, particularly offensive, particularly destructive, particularly destructive. So it could be this world leader that's leading this when he talks about wild beasts of the earth. And again, Jesus had warned of this. Jesus had given us just a couple of verses about this in Matthew 24. And now this is being expanded upon in the book of Revelation, giving us that additional revelation that'll equip us to be able to live in light of his coming. So if we take the Olivet Discourse as our marker and our guide, we see that these first four judgments, these four horsemen of the apocalypse, bring these, what Jesus refers to as these birth pangs of the tribulation, these warning signs. And then beginning in verse 9 with martyrdom and the signs that are coming later, is that we see this great tribulation beginning. We're making a transition from just a beginning, and note that a beginning is pretty terrible. Almost 2 billion people dying, famine, war, a false peace, and it's going to get worse. It moves into this great tribulation with the fifth and sixth seals. So let's look at that. It says, when the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. So, no intermediary creature at this point, right? There's no beast that's saying come and calling forth a horseman. But this is coming directly from Jesus. The Lamb broke that fifth seal, and what did John witness? Martyrs, those slain. That word slain is used of Jesus's death. It means murdered, violently murdered. And the reason that they're murdered is because of the word of God, their perseverance. And we had been warned about this earlier in the book of Revelation. Their perseverance, according to the word, has been maintained. They were warned to be persevering, and they did. And they were martyred. And this must take place, we're told. These things must take place. These are a divine ordinance. Again, some who take a different view of the book of Revelation, what they call pre-wrath view, which means that the rapture won't happen until about this point or a little bit later, sometime in Revelation 6, it varies. Um, they say that the church will experience the wrath of Satan, but not the wrath of God, which doesn't break until later in chapter 6. I think they're wrong, and I think it's clear that what we're seeing here is the wrath of the Lamb, Jesus waging war globally in order to bring his kingdom onto the earth. Also point out here that these martyrs died apparently during the tribulation. So the church is raptured sometime before chapter 6. I talked about the rapture of the church last time. Church is raptured sometime before chapter 6. And so these martyrs are those who maintain the testimony during the tribulation, during these first 4 horsemen that came out. So obviously, people who have rejected the gospel before the rapture are not denied. Sometimes that question comes up, is there a chance for salvation after the rapture? Absolutely right. And we see that here. And we'll see that other places as we go through this tribulation period. Some say, and maybe I'll just turn there. Let me just turn to 2 Thessalonians 2:10 and read that. Give me a second here. Second Thessalonians 2:10 and 11 says this. Says, and with all the deception of the wickedness for those who, let me back up. This is the one who is coming in accordance with the activity of Satan, with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not accept the love of the truth so as to be saved. For this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence, so that they will believe what is false, in order that they may be judged, in order that they all may be judged who did not believe the truth, but took pleasure in wickedness. So is that saying that if you reject the gospel before the tribulation, you can't be saved during it? Some people point to that. And I'd say no for a number of reasons here. First, it refers to all believers. All unbelievers, not just those who rejected the gospel before the tribulation. So the one unpardonable sin that Jesus talks about, and sometimes people scratch their head, the one unpardonable sin is unbelief. Right now, I believe fully in the sovereignty of God, but that doesn't mean that people don't make a decision. That doesn't mean that people don't have to believe because God is sovereign. They have to believe, and those who reject the gospel before the tribulation are in unbelief, as are all unbelievers. Verse 8 is setting the context of this to what happens during the tribulation. And then verses 11 and 12 explain that the response of God to unbelief during the tribulation. So again, it's saying what's going to happen during the tribulation. People are not going to believe. They're going to have a spirit of delusion. They're going to believe a lie. And in response to believing a lie, God brings them judgment during the tribulation, not before. It's not preventing them from believing if they rejected the gospel before. Ephesians 1:4 is very clear. God's sovereign will determines one's destiny way before the tribulation. And Revelation 13, we'll come there later, shows that God's sovereign will determines one's destiny during the tribulation. So again, during the tribulation, God's sovereignty is who he has elected for salvation are going to be saved. It's the main message here. There is salvation that's available during the tribulation. Verse 10, the fifth seal, the martyrdom here. How long, Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? So, again, even those saved during the tribulation will suffer. Sometimes, again, people have odd ideas, I think, sometimes if they're not reading carefully. And some think that somehow the people who come to faith during the tribulation will be particularly protected. They'll be shut off from any further effects of the tribulation. But in fact of the matter is that they will suffer, and they will suffer a martyr's death. And in that martyr's death, glorify God, which will be used to lead others to salvation as well. Notice that they are aware, they're awake, they're not in heaven sitting on a cloud, strumming a harp and eating grapes, right? They're not in this state where they're unaware of what's happening on the earth. No, they are pleading with God. They are in prayer. They are asking God, acknowledging that He is right, that what He does is true. But He asks them how long. They will asking God, how long? And the implication is here, please, Lord, speed it up. We see this in the Psalms, right? We see David and Asaph and Ethan pleading with God to bring judgment on God's enemies. This is very consistent in the Bible. This is a prayer that you and I can pray. If you look in my playlist, you'll find a special message teaching about whether or not we should pray what's called the imprecatory Psalms. Those are Psalms where the psalmist asks for God to bring judgment on their enemies. The answer is yes. We can pray that with the psalmist, and we see here that even the redeemed saints who have been glorified and taken to heaven are praying this kind of prayer, leaving the result to God, leaving the timing to God, but crying out for judgment, crying out for justice. It's okay to pray for justice. Also, notice this phrase, those who dwell on the earth. This is recurrent in the book of Revelation. And it becomes, as we see this, we saw it in chapter 3, and we'll see it later, becomes a recurrent theme for those, and a label for those whose loyalty is to the earth, right? They dwell here, they're settled here, this is their home. They have no heavenly perspective, they have no spiritual insight. They hate God. And we'll see that here in the book of Revelation over and over again. They know that judgment's coming from heaven. They know that judgment's coming from the God of the Bible. Yet they continue to shake their fist at Him. This is the nature of fallenness. This is the nature of evil. Even though they know it's wrong, even though they know they're at odds with the God of the universe, they continue to rebel against Him. They're going to be shaking their fist at God all the way to hell. So here's these pleas of the psalmist that I talked about. Oh Lord, God of vengeance, shine forth. How long shall the wicked, O Lord, how long shall the wicked exalt? So this is a theme through the Bible, that God's people pray for wickedness to be judged, for unrighteousness, injustice to be avenged. There's nothing wrong with praying like this. Now, the key thing is that not to pray perhaps for our own personal vengeance, not to pray for our own personal vindication, but rather that God, who is holy and true, would be vindicated, that His holiness would be seen in the judgments of the wicked. His truthfulness would be on display in the judgments of the liars and the deceivers. With regard to these martyrs, then, it goes on in verse 11 to say that to each one of them was given a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer. So here's God's answer to their prayer. Every prayer that a saint prays is answered. God either grants the prayer, says yes. God either says no, He denies the prayer, or He says wait. and that's the case here. Wait. God has timing involved here. He has a timeline, a sequence, a chronology that he's following. So he knows how long they should wait. How long? Until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed with the sword, even as they had been, would be completed. This is kind of spine tingling. God has a number of servants, doulos, slaves, a number of people who he's going to save and martyr before their number is completed. It's disturbing, isn't it? The white robes here, we'll see at the end of the tribulation, these are symbolic of the deeds they have done. They are being clothed with those deeds. They're shining forth, as Paul says in Philippians, as bright stars because of the white robes that they're wearing, the rewards that God is handing out at the end for the saints for their good deeds. And even though, again, we sometimes trip over the fact that God is sovereign, yet people act according to their nature. They're free to act according to a fallen nature. God has determined a certain number of people who are going to be martyred during the tribulation. And yet those who murder them are going to be held accountable, right? We see this again. This is not just something new in the book of Revelation. God consistently in the Old Testament used the nations around Israel as a tool of judgment, but then turned around and punished the tool of his judgment for their barbarity. We see this in Isaiah. We see this in Zephaniah. We see this in Ezekiel. We see the sovereignty of God and the decisions, the will of man working in harmony to ensure that God's plan is carried forward, God's plan is carried out. So one of the things that, one of my takeaways from this is when I'm praying for someone, of course I pray for protection, I pray for healing if there's sickness involved, but I also pray that God's will would be done in their lives. I pray that God would cause them to stand firm in their suffering and be a witness for him in their suffering, because who knows, it may not be God's will to relieve their suffering, it may not be God's will to protect them from death, but God would use the witness, their witness during suffering and their witness during death to reveal himself to their murderers, to their torturers. So we need to allow God to be God and not try to direct him and give him our schedule and our plan and our idea of what's right and what's wrong, but to yield to him. Again, he's faithful and true, and we need to allow God to rule and to bring the kingdom as he sees fit. See this sixth seal now. We come to the sixth seal being opened here, and it's a seal that is showing these cosmic disturbances. So we've seen the white horse, we've seen famine, we've seen war, we've seen famine, we've seen death. And now we've moved into this period of great tribulation, and it's going to be piling up worse and worse. And we see now these cosmic disturbances that are going to be happening. It says, I looked. This is John speaking again. John is bringing us this revelation that Jesus is showing him. And he broke the sixth seal. Who is that? This is the Lamb. And there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth. As a fig tree casts its unripe figs were shaken by a great wind. So it's these ripe fruit that are falling from space. The sky was split apart like a scroll, and when it was rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. So again, this is global, right? This is not a local earthquake. This is not a local eclipse. We just had one this spring across the southern United States up into the Northeast. These are global events that are happening, and they're inescapable, as we'll see in verses 15 through 17. All strata of society reacts, all levels of society. The famine seemed to be limited to the most vulnerable, but now this is expanding and expanding rapidly, and everybody's recognizing what's going on. The shaking of the earth, the heavens. I personally take this as a literal event that's going to happen. There's going to be an actual earthquake. There's going to be actual disruptions in space and the balance among the planets. Some take this to be perhaps a metaphor for political and social convulsions. Could be, but as I said, and I hope to be able to show you that example, I stick with what's literal until I, absolutely can't, right? And I think that we can stick with the literal interpretation here that there's going to be these cosmic disturbances that are going to accompany this series of judgments that open the birth pangs of the tribulation and blossom into the great tribulation. Again, different theories on what this might be. Verses 15 through 17, as we come to the chapter, then we see the reactions. We see what's happening among people. It says the kings of the earth. Notice the different levels of society. The kings of the earth, the great men, the commanders, the rich, the strong, every slave and every free man hid themselves. So they're seeing what's going on. They're seeing what's unfolding during this first part of the tribulation. They're terrorized. They're afraid. This is a normal reaction to these things that are going on. Put yourself in their place. And they go among caves and rocks. There's been a blossoming, I think, especially among the wealthy, to go build themselves bomb shelters, build themselves a place to hide, stocking it up with food and water, even as delicacies, oil and wine. We see that movement even in our own time. We see among just common people, slaves and freemen, this move toward being preppers, being prepared to go through the tribulation, if that's even possible. And which I don't think it is. I think back to the prepper thing, I think there's a prudence on having a certain amount of foodstuffs available. But I think to trying to prepare yourself for withstanding 7 years of God's wrath is foolish. I think it's a waste of your time and effort. I know you're going to send me nasty notes. I understand that. But I just share with you my opinion, brothers and sisters, that what we need to do is be living a holy and set apart life today, that we're ready to reap the rewards that we'll receive from the Lord when he raptures his church. So these terrified people are hiding themselves in caves and rocks of the mountains, and they're pleading. Look what they're pleading to. They're naturalists, right? They are pleading with perhaps Mother Earth, with Gaia, fall on us and protect us. Notice what he says here. Hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come. Who's able to stand? Of course, that's a rhetorical question. Nobody. But notice here, they know it's God. They know that this is an act of God, that this is the day of his wrath. This is the long-awaited. day of the Lord that's broken upon us. And they are asking for the earth to protect them. They're refusing to turn in repentance. They're refusing to bow the knee, even though their knee will bow. They are refusing to acknowledge God in a saving way. They just acknowledge that his wrath is breaking upon the earth, and they're looking to the earth to protect them. How silly, isn't it? How silly. And shouldn't we learn today, while we've got it relatively easy, to depend on the Lord, to rely on him, to not waver, to keep our eyes on him, and to be careful to obey him. So, just to sum up what I've been saying about the pre-wrath view, the wrath, or the orge is the Greek word there. It's not mentioned until verses 16 and 17. The acknowledgement that this is the God's wrath on the lips of unbelievers, the acknowledgement on the lips of unbelievers is the associated with the sixth seal. So they conclude, these people that hold to a pre-wrath view, these Bible teachers that teach a pre-wrath view, they say the wrath of God isn't experienced until seals 1 to 5 are done. Those are Satan's wrath. God's wrath is and the rapture will happen between the 5th and 6th seals. And again, for reasons I've already discussed, I think that's wrong. I think it's significant that it's the unbelievers that finally recognize that this is God's wrath, not just with this seal, but with all the seals. So, again, just more evidences here of discounting the pre-wrath view. And again, my intention here is not to beat up on pre-wrath believers, but to encourage you to be certain that as a believer of Jesus Christ now during the church age, you will be raptured before this tribulation breaks on the earth, that you will be raptured because of God's grace, because of God's mercy, because it's God's plan, and he has told us his plan. So we need to be living now with confidence and expectation as we look forward to the coming of Christ. Again, this just continues my argument against the pre-wrath. I'm not going to labor it here. If you are interested, you can come back and look at this in more detail. Just want to be focused throughout this, not so much taking a lot of time refuting the false views, but really teaching what's clearly taught in Scripture. It was a time and a place for refuting false views, but it's not now. What we want to do as we go through the book of Revelation is give reasons for the correct view of what we're looking, what's happening in this book. So how do we respond to this now? I've mentioned several times we're not going to experience this, but it's being revealed to us. So for what reason? How are we to respond? Well, let me give you three things here. One is gratitude for God's grace. We are so fortunate to be born during the church age. So fortunate. If we had been born before the church age, perhaps we would not even be believers today. But we are born again during this age, and we should have just effusive gratitude in our prayers for the Lord to reveal these things to us, to give us a heart of understanding and eyes of seeing and ears of hearing the gospel. I think we should have sorrow and grief over what's coming. You know, we don't want to be those kinds of people who look at this and just click our tongue, tisk, tisk, tisk. Isn't it terrible what's going to happen to those people? They deserve it. They've resisted the gospel all this time. No, we should be sorrowful and full of grief that 2 billion people are going to lose their lives during this first round of tribulation that is not even the great tribulation, that it's going to get worse. And that should break our hearts that people are going to suffer this. People we see every day in the grocery store, people we see on the streets, perhaps even people that we gather together with on Sunday mornings. Jesus told us that there's wheat, or there's tares among the wheat. He told us that there's among the fish that are caught, there's going to be some that are sorted out by his angels. And there's people that we are among every day who are going to face what we're looking at in this book. So it should result not only in sorrow and grief, but really a yearning for souls. Would that everyone do the work of an evangelist. Certainly would be great if we all did that. But, if we live in light of his coming today, if we live a holy and godly life, if we live a life that's focused on our progressive sanctification, you're going to get people's attention. They'll notice. And God will use your example just as he uses the examples of the martyrs during the tribulation. He'll use your example to put a stone in people's shoe and get them wondering, what's different? Why are you acting like this? Why are you, while everyone else is afraid and full of fear and tribulation, why are you during this time so calm and so I guess steadfast to live a holy life? So, brothers and sisters, I think these are 3 suggestions. Maybe you have others for a response to what we're seeing here. Don't dismiss it. Don't just examine it. It's more than just an object for examination. Really, it's an object of meditation and an object of transformation. So don't just settle for being educated. Be encouraged and be edified by God's word. So God bless you, brothers and sisters. I hope this is useful to you. We're just a little bit over an hour. So I pray that the Lord would use this in your life. God bless you.